Save yourself time. There are a few top hat questions, but again, top hat questions that are live, they don't count for anything, but they're there for your own learning and to help you learn. And also participation as well. I mean, just so that you can like, okay, kind of engage your brain while you're actually thinking about this really lovely endocrinology stuff. Yep, happy Wednesday. So I hope I can end on time like I did last time. All right, so before we start, let's have a top hat question. Okay, so get yourself logged in. And oh gee, review. So recommendations on studying. Yeah, so we have the schedule. We're still covering the endocrine system, but as you can see, we covered a lot about the endocrine system. So pretty much any hormone I mentioned, anything, the effects of these hormones, or if you have excess of these hormones or lack of these hormones, and the health effects, what's caused. So I did cover a lot of things in the endocrine system. That's why I think it kind of does a disservice if we rush through this stuff, because again, there's a lot of organs that secrete hormones, many hormones as well, many different effects. So hopefully this question I see 100% because this is review. And what do we see? So the correct order would be HPA axis. Oh, we're just under 100%. So again, we almost got it. So 97 of you got it, 7% of you got it correct. So yeah, you might want to try to refresh Top Hat if you're not seeing the question right now. Or you can play at home. Next question, keep it open. Now put these hormones in order of their release and activation in the HPA axis. So we know it's hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. So we put the organs in order, but how about the hormone cascade? Yep, HPA axis right here. Okay, let's see what the most popular response is. This was the most popular response, and the most popular response is correct. So again, you have the corticotropin releasing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and then cortisol. So this is just in the HPA axis. In the HPT axis, a different set of hormones, and in the HPG axis, depending if it's the male or the female reproductive system, you have different sets of hormones as well. But notice that in these typical HPA, HPT, and HPG axes, you have 3 waves of hormones that occur in order. Now this isn't just an activation, there's actually a negative feedback loop, and if you don't remember what that is, go back to the previous lecture talking about hormonal control and negative and positive feedback. But yes, this is the order of activation. Okay, now to our regular lecture. Okay, so that was a top hat question, and why did I cover that? Well, what are we launching into here? So again, we said the hypothalamus in the HPA axis produces CRH, the corticotropin releasing hormone, and then you produce receptors for CRH on the pituitary gland. Then when you have CRH binding to these receptors, this tells the pituitary gland to make ACTH. And then ACTH, once it's secreted, will target the adrenal cortex. Again, the adrenal glands, there are several layers, but the adrenal cortex is one of the layers. And this adrenal cortex is going to produce cortisol and also androgens and some mineral corticoids. But for this lecture, focus on the cortisol. So again, there are more hormones being released by the adrenal cortex, but cortisol is one of the stars of today's lectures. Okay, so then what does cortisol do? Well, let's talk about the effects of cortisol. Cortisol has broad effects around the entire body. We did talk about its anti-inflammatory effects, and we did touch upon like how it does have effects on your blood glucose, which is basically the amount of glucose you have in your blood. So what does it do to the organ we call the liver? So what we have here is the liver, and what does cortisol do? Well, it does many things, and one of the things it does is gluconeogenesis. And I know it sounds like a big, scary word, but it's really great because if you break down this word into root words or particles and also like prefixes and suffixes, you can kind of get what it's getting at. So gluco refers to glucose. That's pretty simple. Neo, so when you say something's neo, it's like novel, it's new, like a neonate is a newly born thing. So the neo is new, and then genesis. So whenever you think genesis, think about generating something. You have embryogenesis, you're generating a new embryo. When you're having like osteogenesis, you're generating new bone tissue. So whenever you see this term genesis in science and medicine, it's referring to creating something new. All right, so then we have creating new glucose. So when we put glucose, new, and create, you have creating new glucose. And then the liver is the main site of gluconeogenesis. And yeah, so this is why the liver and cortisol is very important, because cortisol stimulates gluconeogenesis, aka the creation of new glucose molecules. All right, so again, then this is also another thing too. Like often people confuse glycolysis with gluconeogenesis. So glycolysis refers to the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. But gluconeogenesis is special in that you're not actually breaking down glycogen, you're actually synthesizing new glucose molecules from other organic molecules in your body. Again, we're still covering endocrinology because there's many different types of there's many different types of hormones and many different effects. So this is glucose, and what we're seeing is like a kind of like a hybrid between those organic chemistry structures and showing you the individual atoms. But what I'm getting at here is that over here, remember when you don't explicitly say what atom is in a organic chemical structure, there's a carbon there. So glucose has 6 carbons, and when we get to metabolism, I think this is a unit for unit 3, you will need to know that it is carbons. Now, general structures of the hormones, in general, I won't ask you to know like, okay, what's the difference between cortisol and testosterone? I think that's unfair at this point, especially if you haven't had organic chemistry. Now, I think it's fair to say, what type of hormone is cortisol? Is it a monoamine? Is it peptide? Is it a steroid? Well, again, the cortisol, it has that 4-ring structure, and it's definitely a steroid. So I think those are fair things to ask. I'm not going to ask you to memorize like flashcards, like which one is differentiate between the different steroid hormones, but yeah, I'm not going to ask you for specific chemical structures, but you should know what category they fall into. All right, so what we have here are various organic chemical, so here are the various things. Like here we have glycerol, we have different amino acids here. Do I want you to know these specific structures? I don't want you to know these specific structures, but this is what I'm getting at here. Remember, these all have carbon right here. So the interesting thing about gluconeogenesis in the liver, it takes all these organic chemicals and nutrients and metabolites in your body that have carbon, and it takes it, processes it, does all these, so it basically takes the carbon, shuffles it around, make these new glucose molecules by shuffling the carbon around, so it actually forms the structure of glucose. So this is how you actually get new glucose molecules. You actually scavenge all these carbon-containing compounds from around the body, rearrange it via all the enzymes in the liver, and you can create new glucose out of these molecules. Yeah, so steroids are very easy to determine based on the structures. So I'm going very general with structures, and structures, you should know how to identify at a glance the 3 main classes we covered: monoamines, and then peptide hormones and steroids. And actually throw thyroid hormones in there as well. Not into either the monoamines or the steroid category, but you should know that they're definitely different in structure from a monoamine and a steroid molecule. All right, so what does the liver do? It made all these new glucose molecules, so you dump it into the bloodstream. So this is what gluconeogenesis basically does. You take carbon from all these metabolites and organic compounds in your body, and then rearrange that carbon into the 6 carbon structure called glucose.